Thank you, Mr. David. So there seems to be a nautical theme going on, but I'm probably the only Toastmaster of those who've spoken with a kind of seam thematic who is going to be using it as a metaphor and not actual experience. Here we go. Fellow Toastmasters, honoured guests, tonight I'm here to inspire you. And yet, if I'm honest, I must confess that I've always been somewhat ambivalent about inspiration. Inspiration will take you triumphantly out of the harbour, but it will just as quickly disappear when the shoreline is no more in sight and not a breath of air is stirring the waters. In the summer of 1997, the most important chapter of my life up to that point ended. I graduated from a university that I had spent all of my school years diligently and very focusedly working to gain entry to. And at that moment, I realized in terror that the easiest bit of life was now, in fact, behind me. All my life up to that point, I had been running away. I had been masquerading that I was just like everybody else. I had buried myself in my ambition and my studies, but now I would actually have to stand my ground as an individual. I would have to be, as my father had always counselled me growing up, the master or the captain of my ship, and I wasn't ready. Some of you may remember the year 1997. It was the year that Tony Blair won a landslide victory to end 18 years of unbroken Tory rule as Prime Minister of Great Britain. It was the year that scientists in Scotland's Roslin Institute first cloned Dolly the sheep. It was the year that the Mars Pathfinder first sent us images from the surface of the red planet. And it was the year that the first of J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series and James Cameron's box office hit Titanic first graced their audiences. But it was also a year of crisis, a year of tragedy, and a year of a closing of an era. On July 1st, after 156 years under British rule, Hong Kong reverted back to China. On July the 2nd, the devaluation of the Thai baht caused a currency crisis that swept into turmoil Asian economies. On July the 15th, the fashion designer Gianni Versace was murdered in Miami. On August the 31st, Diana, Princess of Wales, died in a tragic car accident in Paris, followed by, a week later, the passing of Mother Teresa of Calcutta. And in the midst of all these things, somewhere, my life, my little life, too, was gone. After 3 years of relentless hard work, but burgeoning self-discovery and the artistic hopes of a new life, I was being banished back to a little island where everything that I had learnt about myself and my hopes for my life would have to be buried, locked away in a metaphorical storeroom in the hope that if I was lucky, perhaps one day, maybe, the opportunity to arise and live once more would be mine. Well, to cap this bittersweet closing of the chapter, my best friend at the time, a historian called Richard Burley, and I decided we would have a final blast. And so we bought interrailing tickets, which was quite a splurge in those student days, and travelled throughout the month of August all over Europe. So continental trains took us from Calais to Paris, from Paris to Rome, from Rome to Florence, Siena, Bologna, and onward to Venice, to Vienna, to Munich, to Prague, and finally to Bilbao, Barcelona, San Sebastian, and back. National frontiers began to blur. Days of the week blended one into the other. All of Europe was on holiday and on the move. We saw families and sweethearts. We saw veterans and rogues. We saw the curious. We saw the eccentric. We saw the tired and even the inspired. But the only unwelcome interruption of real life would come when the frontier officers would board our cabin and demand to see our documents. Richard's GB passport, of course, took only moments to process and stamp. My own, then non-EU Cyprus Republic passport would invariably take longer. Unfamiliar and remote in those days as it was to the keepers of the borders. In those moments, I would feel an invisible knife go through my heart. And because at the time I was still a practicing Christian, in every church and every cathedral that we would pass through, and there were many, I would pray on my knees, literally, to whatever supreme being there existed, to give me the courage and the strength to buck tradition and the fortitude to hold my own against convention going back, because I knew that the newly hot off the press printed law degree in my hand was nothing more than an expensive ticket to a ship going nowhere. Well, to cut a long story short, I have to confess that there were indeed storms and very difficult currents to navigate once I got home. And just as I had feared, my change in life direction profoundly disappointed people very, very close to me. And it sent me, this time, on a different voyage. One that Carl Jung, the father of depth psychology, once called the night sea voyage. A metaphorical journey through one's psyche, which is always undertaken alone, in a state of dread, and requiring a kind of